In the last part, you said the power system doesn't primarily generate, but rather harvests and controls energy from the ether. For an engineer like you, trained in the established model, this must have been a radical thought. What started this journey for you?
It started with a respect for the craft and a gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. In our field, Nikola Tesla is a legend, but he's treated like some kind of genius, but eccentric, wizard. Most engineers admire him for alternating current, but they dismiss his more radical ideas as unrealistic. I decided to do what few actually do. I read his patents. Not just the summaries, but the technical descriptions, page by page.
And what did you find?
I found an architecture for a completely different system. He wasn't just talking about wireless power transmission, but about tapping energy directly from what he called the ambient medium. The patent for the apparatus for utilization of radiant energy, U.S. patent number 685,957, is a blueprint. It's basically an etheric motor. It describes an insulated, elevated metal plate, an antenna that gathers static charge, and a capacitor to store it. This ain't science fiction. It's solid applied electrical engineering, but based on a premise we've been taught to ignore.
But a patent doesn't prove it was realized on a large scale, does it?
No, it doesn't prove anything. It was just an invitation to dig a bit deeper. It was the next step that shook me. By chance, I came across photographs from the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. The White City. Have you seen them?
I've seen the pictures, yes. Enormous white buildings in a classical style.
Exactly. As an engineer, I see two impossibilities there. First, the logistics. They built a city the size of ancient Rome, out of stone and plaster, in under 2 years. It just doesn't add up. But it's the second thing that's crucial: the lighting. The photos show the entire area bathed in an intense electric light. Thousands of light bulbs. Officially, this was all powered by Westinghouse generators in a dedicated hall of machinery. I've run the numbers. Based on the technology of the time, the efficiency of the generators, and the transmission losses, the scale of the illumination is nearly impossible. They lit up an area like it was Las Vegas, decades before we had the infrastructure for it.
How do you think it was possible?
I stopped looking at the buildings as architecture and started seeing them as components. The domes and obelisks, they ain't just decoration. They're geometric shapes that function as resonators and atmospheric capacitors. They gather and concentrate charge from the ether. The lagoons and waterways. They weren't just for beauty's sake. Water is a fantastic conductor and essential for grounding in a system like this. The whole fairground was grounded on a scale we can hardly imagine. The statues, many of them, like the enormous statue of the Republic, were coated in metal. They weren't statues. They were terminals, antennas. Chicago wasn't just an exhibition. It was a full-scale demonstration of Tesla's technology for harvesting and distributing etheric energy. The buildings were the power plant.
That's an incredible claim.
It's an engineer's observation. And it didn't stop there. Once I saw this pattern, I started seeing it everywhere. Even in places I'd visited for work. Old ruins, temples. In Egypt, in South America. Look at the old temples. What do you see? Pillars, altars, and chambers. What do I see? I see massive granite blocks, full of quartz. Quartz has piezoelectric properties. It generates a voltage under pressure. The entire foundation of these temples is a giant pressure sensor, converting the Earth's vibrations into electric potential. I see perfectly cut niches and chambers that don't fit human beings. They're shaped like waveguides and resonance chambers, designed to amplify specific frequencies. I see remnants of what we today call insulators and bus bars, carved right out of the stone. They didn't call it electricity. Maybe they called it life force or the voice of the gods. But it's the same principle, the same physics. We haven't invented anything new. We've just rediscovered a fraction of it, wrapped it in steel and copper, and put a meter on it.
Trond, if this technology was so widespread, from Chicago in 1893 to ancient temples, how could it disappear? How could the whole world forget something so fundamental?
Because it wasn't just a technological shift. It was a shift in the philosophy behind the science. The old knowledge was based on an understanding of the ether, of vibration, resonance, and form. It was a holistic science, where physics and spirituality weren't separate. But in the late 1800s and early 1900s, a systematic change occurred.
What kind of change?
The science of resonance was replaced by the science of resistance. The harmonic model was replaced by the thermodynamic one. Instead of drawing energy from a field in balance, we were to create energy through combustion, explosion, and friction. From ether to the internal combustion engine. From harmony to chaos. It was more profitable. And a whole lot easier to control. The knowledge didn't vanish overnight. It was ridiculed, marginalized, and eventually written out of the curriculum. Those who held on to the old ways, like Tesla, were made out to be dreamers and clowns.
But you worked right at the heart of the new system. Did you find any cracks? Anything that didn't align with what you'd been taught?
Cracks? Ma'am, the whole system is one big crack, held together by constant surveillance. There's one thing everyone in my line of work fears more than anything else: a ground fault.
You mean when electricity leaks into the ground?
That's the simple version, yes. To us, it's a critical failure, a huge loss of energy, a danger to life. We've invested billions in massive grounding systems, protective relays and circuit breakers, all to prevent and isolate ground faults. My whole career I've been hunting these faults. But one day after reading Tesla and studying the old diagrams, it hit me. What if a ground fault isn't a fault in the system? What if it's the system behaving correctly?
What do you mean by that?
Our modern power grid is an artificial, closed system that forces energy to move in an unnatural way, through thin metal wires over vast distances. But the earth beneath us is not neutral. It's a gigantic, living capacitor with a nearly infinite energy potential. When we have a ground fault, it's not just a leak. It's the grid trying to do what's natural, to equalize the potential. It's trying to connect directly to the endless source it's been isolated from.
So, we're spending billions to stop the grid from drawing free energy from the Earth.
We're spending billions to maintain the instability that makes it possible to measure and control the energy. A stable system is a grounded system, a system in balance with the ether and the Earth. But you can't centrally control a system like that. You can't meter it the same way. Our entire infrastructure is designed to keep the energy trapped in the wires, floating at an artificial voltage level, always on the verge of collapse.
Okay.
My job was never really to deliver power. My job was to make sure the system didn't do what it instinctively wants to do: connect to the abundance. I was a kind of dam keeper, but the dam was built in the middle of an ocean. I spent 40 years patching cracks in a structure that never should have been built that way in the first place. The cracks weren't the flaw. The design itself was the flaw.
And this system, which you describe as vulnerable and artificial, this is what we're now going to make smart, with AI and total surveillance.
Yes. Now you understand. They're not building a new system. They're perfecting the control mechanism of the old one. They're about to use a soulless intelligence to manage a system that chokes a living energy. That's why I'm speaking out. Because this is no longer just a question of engineering. It has become a question of the soul.
Please stay tuned if you want to see the next episode.